Mukhya Sakha, Chief Branch, Sakya Prema Rashi, full of fraternal love, Shola Sangira, of 16 knots, Kashta, wood, yea, that, Tuli, raising, Kaila, made, Vamshi, flute. Translation. Ramadas, one of the chief branches, was full of fraternal love of Godhead. He made a flute from a stick with 16 knots. Text 17. Translation. Srila Gadadhar Das was always fully absorbed in ecstasy as a gopi. In his house, Lord Nityananda enacted the drama Danakeli. This is text 18. Translation. Sri Madhava Ghosh was a principal performer of kirtan. While he sang, Nityananda Prabhu danced. Text 19. Translation. When Vasudev Ghosh performed kirtan describing Lord Caitanya and Nityananda, even wood and stone would melt upon hearing it. Text 20. Translation. There were many extraordinary activities performed by Murari, a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Sometimes in his ecstasy he would slap the cheek of a tiger, and sometimes he would play with a venomous snake. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Murari Chaitanya Das was born in the village of Sa Vrindavanpura, which is situated about 2 miles from the Galashi station on the Budwan line. When Murari Chaitanya Das came to Navadvip, he settled in the village of Modadrum or Mogachi Gram. At that time he became known as Sangha or Saranga Murari Chaitanya Das. The descendants of his family still reside at Sareya Pata. In the Chaitanya Bhagavat Adi-lila chapter 5 there is the following statement. Murari Chaitanya Das had no material bodily features, for he was completely spiritual. Thus he would sometimes chase after tigers in the jungle and treat them just like cats and dogs. He would slap the cheek of a tiger and take a venomous snake on his lap. He had no fear for his external body, of which he was completely forgetful. He would spend all 24 hours of the day chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra and speaking about Lord Chaitanya and Nityananda. Sometimes he would remain submerged in water for 2 or 3 days, but he would feel no bodily inconvenience. Thus he behaved almost like stone or wood. But he always used his energy in chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. No one can describe his specific characteristics, but it is understood that wherever Murari Chaitanya Das passed, whoever was present would be enlightened in Krishna consciousness simply by the atmosphere he created. Om Jnana Timidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshu Unmanitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Gurim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my spiritual master has very kindly come, forced open my eyes with the torchlight of transcendental knowledge. I offer my most respectful obeisances unto his lotus feet. By the grace of the spiritual master, the saviour of all fallen souls, even a lame man can cross over mountains, a blind man can see stars in the sky, and a dumb man can recite eloquent Vedic poetry. So many wonderful personalities being described here. Srila Gadadhar Das, who is different to Gadadhar Pandit, and Madhava Ghosh, wonderful Kirtaniya, and Vasudev Ghosh. But we'll focus a little bit on Murari, who is described, who has many names, and the one we'll use predominantly now today is Saranga Thakur. And there are many wonderful pastimes regarding this intimate associate of Mahaprabhu, as Prabhupada has described a number in his wonderful purport. And any of us who have done the Navadvip Mandal Parikrama will no doubt have been to Mamgachi. It's a very important place of Mahaprabhu's Lila and many of his wonderful associates' pastimes as well. And Mamgachi is situated on the island of Madrumadvip, which we know Navadvip means Nava, 9 Dvipa islands, all surrounded by different tributaries of the Ganga. And the island of Madrumadvip, on which Mamgachi is situated, personifies dasyam in the 9 processes. Interesting that, not by coincidence, but there are 9 processes of bhakti, and there are 9 islands in Sri Navadvip Dham. So dasyam, Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma Nivedanam. Can anyone tell me which most exalted Vaishnava is the example of achieving perfection simply by Dasyam? Thank you. Krishna Kirtan. Yes, Hanuman. Achieved all perfection simply by rendering service to Lord Ramachandra. Yes. So that is Madrumadvip. And it's also the birthplace of Vrindavan Das Thakur, Mamgachi. And also the appearance place, the ancestral home of Malini Devi, the wife of Srivas Thakur. And if they didn't appear there, many great Vaishnavas lived there at different times, such as Vasudev Datta and his brother Mukunda Datta. They were also residents there of this very important holy place. So, so Sharanga Thakur, he was residing there and doing his puja to his worshipable deities, Radha Gopinath. And it's interesting because Sharanga Thakur only had one arm, but every day he would go into the forest and collect flowers and fruits and what other ingredients he needed to worship his deities. And he would worship them all day long, and he would also beg some rice and other milk from neighbourhood households. They were very happy to have such a saint living in their midst. They would give Sharanga Thakur whatever he needed for his puja. And then in the evenings, he would cross the Ganga and he would perform Sankirtan with Caitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates wherever the Lord was performing his evening nocturnal Sankirtan pastimes. So what a wonderful life he led. And it is interesting also that in his old age it became a little difficult for him to do his puja. Similar to Gadadhar Pandit in Puri, as he got a little older, it was difficult for him to put the crowns and the turbans and the garlands on his worshipable deity of Tota Gopinath. So Gopinath sat down to facilitate his dear servant being able to render service. So in the same way, towards his old age, Sharanga Thakur, his deity, deities Radha Gopinath, they said to him, you should accept some disciples now, because you're not actually able to do this service so nicely anymore. You're getting old, but if you accept 1 or 2 disciples, then they can take over the deity worship. Along with that instruction directly from Krishna himself, Caitanya Mahaprabhu was also instructing Sharanya Thakur, you're very qualified, you should accept some disciples. And he was really harping on this. But Sharanga Thakur did not consider himself qualified and wasn't interested in accepting any disciples. But then one day Mahaprabhu very forcefully gave him that instruction. So Saranya Thakur said, all right, the next person I meet tomorrow, I'll initiate them. So he was taking his bath in the Ganga early the next morning, and something touched his lotus foot, and it was a corpse. It was a 16-year-old boy who had expired the day before, and as was the custom for children, even young persons, their bodies would not be cremated, but rather they would often be put on a raft and sent out into the midst of Mother Ganga, and ultimately their bodies would go off into the sacred waters of the Ganga. So Saranya Thakur, he honoured his vow, and he whispered the Hare Krishna Mahamantra into the ear of this deceased young man, who immediately came to life. Life came back into his body, and it was quite a miraculous pastime. And that young man was very grateful. His name was Murari, hence the different names that Saranga Thakur received, as Prabhupada mentions here, Murari, Caitanya. That young man was very grateful, and he came back to the ashram of Saranga Thakur, and was very happy to assist the Thakur in he was trained up in everything he needed to know. He came from a respectable family, and then word spread upstream back to the village of this young man Murari that he was still alive, and he was staying at the ashram of Saranga Thakur. So the parents came, and they were overjoyed. Our dear son, oh, we're so happy. Please come back home now. But young Murari said, you gave me up for dead, and now my Gurudev, he has brought me back to life. So I'm going to stay here. And he did. So quite a miraculous pastime. And also it's said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would regularly come to Mamgachi on his way back from Vijayanagara. And Vijayanagara was a place of great learning. It's actually the ancestral home of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya and his brother, whose name is Vijayavachaspati. And Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya had already migrated to Jagannath Puri on the invitation of the king to become the Raj Pandit there. But his brother had stayed back in Vijayanagara. And Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as a young scholar, would regularly go there for philosophical debates. And then he would stop in at Mamgachi on his way back to his own home. And he would give his association to Saranya Thakur there and other devotees. And on one occasion, Mahaprabhu noticed that the bakul tree, which was outside the ashram of Saranya Thakur, it was dying. And he asked Saranya Thakur, what are you going to do about this tree? Is not healthy. So Saranya Thakur, he said, Lord, only if it receives your mercy will it continue to live. So with that, Mahaprabhu put his big, long, golden arms around the tree, and miraculously that tree came back to full health, producing beautiful flowers. And even today, if you go there to Mamgachi, as I'm sure many of us have seen, we were fortunate to go there in 1986, the 500th anniversary of Mahaprabhu's Advent. And the tree appears to just be like a shell with no inner trunk. But it's flourishing very nicely, has beautiful foliage and flowers. So that was after the merciful embrace of Caitanya Mahaprabhu. So, and it's also said that there's a white owl who lives nearby, and I'm not sure if that owl's still with us, but that owl used to come whenever the deities were being offered arati, and also whenever there was a recitation of Srimad Bhagavatam. So, and it's interesting because just like Murari was brought back to life by Saranga Thakur, even though it appeared he was a dead corpse, many of us have been brought to life spiritually by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. And we can recall, some of us old-timers will no doubt remember the words of one of the many songs that Sriman George Harrison Prabhu wrote, being personally coached by Srila Prabhupada in the art of Vaishnava songwriting. And it goes something like this: watch out now, take care, beware of soft shoe shufflers dancing down the sidewalk, a reference to the devotees, as each unconscious sufferer wanders aimlessly. One of Sriman George's famous songs. So each unconscious sufferer wandering aimlessly. So that's of course for persons even in the human form of life who are neglectful, forgetful of their spiritual orientation. That's a sad predicament. But we're brought to life by the kindness of Hari, Guru and Vaishnavas. And Saranga Thakur, he is, in Radha Gopinath's pastimes in Goloka Vrindavan, he is Nandamukhi Saki, very confidential associate of the divine couple. And another wonderful personality who resided at Mamgachi, as we mentioned, is Vasudev Datta and Mukunda Datta, his brother. And Vasudev Datta, we're encouraged when we go to Mamgachi to pray for just a drop of the ocean of compassion that Vasudev Datta has for the conditioned souls here in the material world, in that he prayed to Lord Chaitanya, you please transfer all of the sinful reactions of all the conditioned souls in this whole universe onto my head, and I'll stay here and rot perpetually, and they can all go back to the spiritual world. So devotees, all of us are engaged in the missionary activities of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya, despite what we're doing. It's like our wonderful dedicated pujaris here addressing their lordships so gorgeously every day, so when we come to the temple, our attraction springs towards them and not towards all the temporary, mundane, ephemeral, so-called attractions of this realm. So it's glorious service, addressing their lordships, cooking for them, cleaning Krishna's temple, and of course we go out, we have our many unlimited outreach programs. So when we go to Mamgachi, we can pray like that. My dear Vasudev Datta, you please just give me a drop of the compassion that you have for the fallen souls, so that I can do something in Mahaprabhu's mission. So, and there are more interesting modern day pastimes. Vasudev Datta's deities are still there at Mamgachi. They are Radha, Madan, Gopal. They are the tallest of all the deities. And then Sharanga Murari, Saranga Thakur's Radha Gopinath. There are also deities of Radha Govinda which were worshipped by Shivananda Sain. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he installed Gaur Gadadhar deities there in Mamgachi as well. So they're all there. And but many years after the departure of Vasudeva and Mukunda Dattas, some strangers settled in the house that they formerly occupied, and they were non-devotees. And along with the house came the deities of their lordships. So these people, being atheistic by temperament, were not interested in worshipping these deities. And they decided one day that they'd put all the deities in the Ganga. And this is last century. And there was one disciple of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at that time. His name was Sagara Maharaj. And he was on a train to Calcutta from Mayapur. And as you do on trains in India, he dozed off a little bit. And he had a dream. And in his dream, the deity of Madan Gopal appeared to him and said, these new occupiers of the house want to put us in the Ganga. Can you please come here and rescue us? And this particular Maharaj, Sagara Maharaj, he got off at the next stop. He crossed the railway lines and got on the next train back to Mayapur. And he went there to the village, Mamgachi, and he started inquiring. He went house to house because he didn't know, Madan Gopal didn't indicate which house he was in, but just that he was there in Mamgachi. So after visiting many houses, eventually he came to the house where the deities were, and he inquired from the new occupants, and they admitted, yes, we were going to put the deities in the Ganga. And Sagara Maharaj said, well, we'll take care of them. So the deities were handed over, and gradually a nice arrangements were made for all those deities, and they've been under the care, as I think Prabhupada mentions in another purport a little bit more. So we can just pause and reflect on what an exalted personality that Sharanya Thakur was, in that he had, as Prabhupada mentions here in many different ways, he had no fear, even slapping the cheeks of tigers and playing with poisonous serpents, or remaining in the water of the Ganga for 2 or 3 days and not feeling any bodily inconvenience. Of course, no secret that one of Prabhupada's core teachings is that we're not the body, aham brahmasmi. I am spirit soul. And I was listening to a nice lecture the other day by Shashika Prabhu, and he told a story of one godbrother, Mahamuni Prabhu, who many years before had a terrible flu, was suffering terribly, lying in his sleeping bag on the cold brahmachari ashram floor, and occasionally even letting out a little moan, as you do when you've got a bad flu. And there was a new bhakta in the ashram, and he probably innocently tried to cheer him up by saying, "Prabhu, you're not the body." To which Mahamuni replied, "True, but you're not my body either." So every devotee, aspiring devotee, unless you're on the level of Sharanya Thakur, we don't know what's going on in each and every devotee's body. Could be all sorts of things going on. Devotee may be tolerating some physical discomfort, some mental anxiety, some emotional trauma, maybe all sorts of such as life in the material world, full of the Adi-bhautikas, Adi-daivikas and Adi-atmika miseries going on. So we never presuppose that we know what's going on with any other devotee. And that verse is there, Vaishnavanam Kriya Mudra Vignaya Bijaya, that one should never think that he can understand the inner workings of a Vaishnava. His inner life is a mystery to all of us. What to speak of inner consciousness, even his kriya and his mudra, his actions and even his gestures are a mystery. So it's, of course, Prabhupada's kindness on all of us that he emphasized this, Aham Brahmasmi, I am spirit soul. And of course, he echoed Krishna's many, many verses in Bhagavad Gita in the 2nd chapter. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. But Krishna also explained that there was a difference between him, the Supreme Lord, and Arjuna. I can remember all of my previous incarnations, Arjuna, but you cannot. And of course, the famous 2 verses, Bhumi Apo Nalo Vayu Kamano Buddha Evacha Ahankara Ityame Bina Prakriti Ashtada. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. Altogether, these 8 comprise my separated material energies. And in the very next verse, Parayam itastu anyam prakritim vinide param jiva bhuta mahabaho yayidam dajate jagat. Besides this inferior material energy, O Arjuna, there is the superior spiritual energy, which comprises all living entities who are struggling very hard with this material energy and are sustaining the universe. So this wonderful core principle of Bhakti Yoga is there, which we, of course, are very grateful to be reminded of regularly. And what to speak of unlimited examples throughout Vedic literature. In this Caitanya Caritamrita, we also get the further to that, just knowing one is a spirit soul and not the body, that's wonderful. But Jivera Swarup Hoy Krishna Nityadas. What is the nature, the intrinsic quality of the jiva? And that is Swarup Hoy. The jiva is eternally Krishna's servant, Jivera Swarup Hoy Krishna Nityadas. And we also have a loving and propensity. We also have a service propensity, which when directed towards, again, Hari, Guru and Vaishnavas, it achieves its perfection. But along with that also we have what is known as Ishwara Bhav and Purush Bhav, which means we have a tendency to control and enjoy. But we can do all that in Krishna's service very nicely. So that's enlightening to know all that. And this is our good fortune. Let's see. And of course, Krishna has many wonderful names. One we've been thinking a little bit about lately, which we heard not so long ago, reminded of Bhava Grahi Janardana, which means Krishna accepts the emotion with which something is offered to him. The love, the devotion, in the famous if one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, flower, water, fruit, then I accept it. Patram, no. What is that? What is the first of that verse? If one offers me with love and devotion. Yeah, what's the Sanskrit for that? Thank you. Yes. So important there is, I think, the word priti, means love. One offers means love and devotion. So that's the most crucial ingredient which Krishna is hankering for. And there's a delightful story. Again, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur travelled and preached all over the subcontinent of India for many years, went to many towns, cities, even some remote villages. He was a very famous personality, and his disciples would organise programs and he would come and speak. And after one such village program where thousands of people came from all other villages, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was attempting to leave, but the crowds were just thronging around him, wanting to touch his lotus feet, and so grateful that the great Thakur had come to their village. So whilst leaving, there was one very elderly and frail and Bengali widow, and she really wanted to offer him. All she had, being very poor, were 2 limes and a few paisa. And she wasn't able to get close enough to personally offer them to Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. But she spotted one of his disciples, brahmachari disciples. So she gave them to him, her gifts. And when Thakur was leaving, a little further away, the brahmachari disciple came up and gave them to his Guru Maharaj and said, "This is from one elderly widow. She couldn't get close enough, but she wanted you to have these." Very insignificant gift, a few paisa and a couple of limes. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati turned around and he walked back some distance, short distance, and that good lady was still there, and he thanked her for her gift, and she was just overwhelmed. She was so grateful, so happy. Her bliss knew no end. So it's said that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, even though highly intellectual, was very, very soft-hearted person. He could speak very strongly and powerfully, but he was very, very soft-hearted, and as Prabhupada said when once asked to speak something about his Guru Maharaj, he commented, "What can I say? He was a Vaikuntha man." So Krishna reciprocated Baba Grahi Janardana with that wonderful elderly Vaishnavi's devotion. Even though she didn't have much to offer, still Krishna reciprocated in the most wonderful way, giving her the personal association and namaskar and thank you from his representative, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So, Krishna, another thing we remembered the other day, a quote from Srila Prabhupada. This Krishna consciousness is so simple you can miss it. And of course, Prabhupada would often say that Krishna consciousness is very simple for those who are not duplicitous, not diplomatic, not complicated. We don't overthink it, even though it can be quite overwhelming for new people when they come. And there are so many rules and regulations and details, and sometimes it can all become a little overwhelming. But gradually we find our way. We learn a few basic rules and regulations. Yes, of course, many of us passed through boot camp successfully, graduated, either in the brahmachari or brahmacharini ashram. Even though we may have had bhakta leaders or bhaktin leaders instructing us. I remember Kadamba Kanana Maharaj mentioning how, because he and his wife joined in India, in Vrindavan, another level of, and Maharaj used to say there was one devotee who was either self-appointed instructor or was formally appointed by the temple to train these new householders up who wanted to be devotees. This devotee would regularly instruct Kadamba Maharaj, don't do that, that's offensive. Don't do that, that's offensive. Everything was offensive. So Maharaj was, of course, Grihastha in those days, became a little bit tired of hearing that everything was offensive. Somehow or other he tolerated, and he eventually stopped doing things which were so-called offensive. Yes. Lots more here. Krishna. Perhaps we can finish with the history, which is delightful, of the first recording of Prabhupada chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, the first pressing of a LP record in ISKCON, which linked up very nicely by Krishna's arrangement to Prabhupada eventually getting his Bhagavad Gita as it is published for the first time in America. And I know we had yesterday the anniversary of Srila Prabhupada incorporating the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Mukunda Maharaj personal signatory on that sacred document. So Gargamuni Prabhu tells this story, and 26 2nd Avenue, Prabhupada recorded himself, was recorded chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, and an album was produced, 3,000 copies, and that was the first album, and it was just titled Krishna Consciousness, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. In those days, Prabhupada hadn't yet accepted the honorific titles of Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. It became Gargamuni's service, amongst many other services. Gargamuni was the first treasurer in ISKCON, and his brother Brahmananda was the first temple president. And Prabhupada nicknamed Gargamuni Gargamani. And our Prabhu, long-serving treasurer in many temples in ISKCON. Grubblehurst Road, I think I remember, Prabhu, you were treasurer there, definitely Melbourne. What other temples? Up here or other? Very good. Probably a golden rule of treasurer is to, when people come, Prabhu, I need Lakshmi for this, I need Lakshmi for that. You become very expert, especially when there's not a lot of Lakshmi, Ajita also, and Ganga. Have to have a really good excuse to give the Lakshmi out, right? Sometimes there isn't a lot. But anyway, Gargamuni Prabhu, his service was to somehow or other sell these records. So he devised a plan to go. There was a radio station in New York City at that time, which was a little avant-garde. It was part of the underground, playing music which wasn't normally played on the radio in those days. But it didn't come on the air until midnight every night. And there was a good aspect to that in that radio station's broadcast would go all over North America and even South America and even Europe. So Gargamuni went to the radio station. He went on the subway at 11:30 one night with a couple of the records, and when he got to the building, he had to go up in the elevator, and then he found the radio station broadcasting, but it was really hazy inside. It was really smoky in there. And anyway, he knocked on the door and was let in, and the disc jockeys, he explained he had this record. It was the new transcendental sound vibration, and would they play it on their radio station and also promote it, give the address of the temple where people who wanted to get a copy could write, including a contribution. Records were pretty cheap back then, so it was only a few dollars to purchase. The temple made some profit. The radio station could also make a little profit. So the disc jockeys were very excited, and they agreed, yes, we'll put it on right now. And as was common back then, the smoke in the radio station was from a certain, sometimes medicinal herb or mind-altering substance. I think we all know what that is. So they put the record on, and Gargamuni actually he became quite high. He collapsed, his head on the desk there. Didn't wake up until a couple of hours later. He was already tired, and it was, of course, a late night for devotees. Devotees normally go to bed early. So when he woke up a couple of hours later, he could hear Prabhupada chanting. And he said, have you been playing it the whole time? And they said, yes, we're playing it all. We love it. And and they kept playing it, and they played it every night, and gradually orders started coming to the temple for sales of the record. And one of the letters to purchase a copy of the record came from Macmillan and Company, and it was from the accountant. And Prabhupada was there, and Gargamuni told Prabhupada, because his brother Brahmananda had already been to a lot of the big publishers in New York City trying to get Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita published, but none of them were very interested. So when this happened, Gargamuni and Brahmananda went to Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, we've got this inquiry from Macmillan. And Prabhupada insisted you go there, don't send the record and a letter, you go there in person, he told Brahmananda and Gargamuni. And it was amazing, because when they went there, they met the accountant. He was a nice man, but he was not just the accountant, but he was the accountant. But he had no authority to sign off on what books would be published or not published. But they went there, and they actually took the manuscript that Prabhupada had already produced in English for Bhagavad Gita as it is. So they asked the accountant, who here sort of is your boss, who approves new publications? So this gentleman, he went and got the boss, and this man was very favourable and was very excited. He said, I've wanted to get an English manuscript of Bhagavad Gita to publish, and we're very interested. So can you leave it with us? We'll read through it, and if we like it, because we need a Bhagavad Gita to fill out. They had a whole section at that time, mid-60s, because already the groundswell was there for interest in Eastern philosophy, but they didn't have a Bhagavad Gita, and here was one by Krishna's arrangement. So all that happened just by, the first. And another interesting aspect was George Harrison and John Lennon were visiting New York at that time. What Gargamuni had also done was to place copies of the record, to sell the record to many of the underground record shops around New York. And actually Sriman George and John Lennon had visited New York at that time, and they actually purchased a number of those copies, and they took them back to London with them, and they gave them away to some of their friends, and they listened to them themselves. And that was even before Sriman Mukunda Goswami and the others went to London. So I might stop there, everyone. Jai Sri Caitanya Charitamrita Ki Jai. I don't know if anyone has one quick question or comment, or we can break for breakfast.
Further that executive committee.
May have, Prabhu. Yeah, may have. Well done. Could have. Is that in Adi-lila? Sorry?
He waited for a long time. He was sent away by the
I can't recall. Is that in the Adi-lila maybe or something? Yeah. Not sure. Can't recall that. Okay. Yeah, look it up. Yeah. Not sure. But anyway, somehow or other, yeah, it all connected up.
One of the things that Prabhupada did though, they weren't smooth.
Sorry?
They weren't smooth.
Weren't smooth. No, yeah. Yeah.
Obstacles.
So many obstacles, because we know he did actually bring a manuscript of the Gita to America with him, and he wanted to get it published, but it was stolen along with his typewriter and a few other personal effects from that small office space that Dr. Mishra was letting Prabhupada stay at. Prabhupada came back once and his little room had been broken into and his typewriter. Who knows what the thief was thinking when he stole the Bhagavad Gita manuscript. Of course, we put I hope he read it. But big offence. But anyway, Prabhupada, just bounced back from that. Setback.
Originally the one he wrote in India,
That was also stolen. Yeah. Prabhupada suspected one of his own family members. So twice, imagine. Yeah. Hare Krishna. All right. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai.